Happy Friday. So, Jody here today from Healing Journey, founder of the 12-week program on healing your anxiety holistically called the Holistic Anxiety Fix. So, this is where we do a deep dive into potential root causes of your anxiety and we heal them. So, today I'm going to talk about one of the root causes, or should I say, the misconception of root cause, which is hormones. So I want to start by talking a bit about birth control. So I know that birth control is pretty much normalized amongst our generation. This is something that when I was younger, a lot of the doctors would ask, do you want to be on birth control? Are you on birth control? If you're sexually active, you should be on birth control. And personally, this is something I tried off and on for a couple of years over my life. And I always found that I was a raging disaster on birth control. And I couldn't figure out, is this the birth control that's causing this, or am I just like this? And it disturbed me so much that I actually went off birth control. Then I went back on it several years later and I found I had chronic yeast infections, and that was terrible. And so I went off of it again. But the norm for a lot of the people that I work with, a lot of the women, is that you're on birth control for a minimum of 10 years. Some women are on it for 25 years or more. And the fact of the matter is there's actually no research been done into the long-term effects of birth control. We are the first women to try that out. And so we are the living experiment of what happens when you take birth control. So I'm going to dive into one of the things that happens when you take birth control, a few of them actually. And one of them is that it actually raises your estrogen. So when you take birth control, unless you're on a progesterone-based birth control, typically you're going to get estrogen-like pill that the body sees as estrogen, but the progesterone, the body doesn't see as progesterone. And so it creates this estrogen dominance. And so anyone that's been on birth control for longer than 2 years has experienced estrogen dominance. You also don't have to be on birth control to have estrogen dominance, but if you're on it, then you have it. And what happens when we're estrogen dominant is we actually store copper inside of our tissues. And so this creates copper toxicity, and this leads to anxiety. And what's really interesting is that the lab tests that I use for hair tests, they tested copper toxic patterns back in the 70s, and it was maybe like a 50-50 of women who were presenting with copper toxic and they weren't. And now we see about 70 to 80% of tests come back with copper toxicity. And this is actually reflected in just the amount of anxiety that's present in our generation today. If you look around, we tend to be more anxious than the generation before us. And if I look at the generation even before them, they're a lot calmer and easygoing. And, birth control can be one of these things. And one of the things that birth control does, is a lot of women don't realize, is it actually stops you from cycling, right? So it stops you from naturally bleeding. And so you might think, well, Jody, I bleed during my placebo days if you're on the pill. But what actually is happening is you're withdrawing from that medication. And so it's sort of an induced bleed. It's not a natural cyclical bleed. And so this is actually creating a lot of distress for your body, right? And so a lot of women will say to me, well, Jody, I have to go on birth control, whether hormonal or the pill or an injection. I have to go on it because my cycle is a mess. I have endometriosis or fibroids, or it's painful, or it's all over the place. And so I need to be on this to regulate my hormones. And I want to bust that myth, right? Because those symptoms are actually messages from the body that something is going wrong. So your hormones should not be out of balance if you are in a healthy state. But when we're in a state of dis-ease, what happens is that our hormones naturally are one of the first things to go. And the example I always like to give is, imagine that you are starving and you're going on this journey, right? Your body's not going to naturally get pregnant when you're in that stress state. It's not going to be able to support a child. And so evolutionarily speaking, our hormones, our sex hormones go off and our body takes those resources and says, instead of having you be able to give birth, we're going to take that energy and move it towards, dealing with the stressor, XYZ stressor. And so our hormones go out of whack. So our hormones are actually one of our most kind of symbolic and signaling ways of letting us know as women, something is not right. And so that's why it's really important to dive underneath the hormones. So yes, I run a Dutch hormone test in my membership with the women that are in my membership. And yes, we can see, estrogen's out of whack, and this is causing anxiety, or progesterone's out of whack, and this is causing anxiety, and we can supplement for that. But the question we really need to be asking is, why is it out of whack? And a lot of times it's gut issues, it's other stressors, and it's not eating or being able to absorb enough of the nutrients and building blocks to build that. For high levels of estrogen, sometimes it's even exposure to toxins in the environment that look and act like estrogen. So all of these things are our body's ways of telling us, like, hey, this isn't working, we need to dive deeper. So instead of moving to a birth control scenario where we're manually regulating it, the question that we should be asking ourselves is, how do I get underneath what that root cause is and pull myself off of this supplemental hormone that I'm taking? If you look up the symptoms of birth control, you may be surprised on how many symptoms you actually have that relate to your anxiety and your mental health issues, because there is a massive, massive overlap. And we have been sold this Kool-Aid that as women, it's safe to be on it, and it's okay to be on it, and it's been normalized. But what it actually does is it takes our ability as women, we cycle, right? We cycle with the moon, we are very flowy, and it takes our ability to kind of reconnect in that way away from us. And so I really challenge you to think about, if you're on birth control, A, why am I on it? And B, what messages is my body telling me with my hormones that this pill is masking, right? If you're doing it for family planning, there's other ways to family plan. There's lots of people that plan that way that is quite effective. And so you really want to be thinking about, is the outcome of the birth control is the cost of it worth the outcome? Is it worth it to me, or do I want to really dive deep and figure out why? And how much of that birth control is really playing into the reason I'm in this group, right? So I want to leave you with one of the easy to implement strategies. It's a strategy that I actually use in the program, the Holistic Anxiety Fix, where we use supplements and we use lifestyle changes and mindset strategies and minerals to get to the root cause of anxiety. And one of the things we do is we start to give the body the building blocks it needs to build healthy hormones. And that is through seed cycling. So I would love to share with you seed cycling. It is something you can still do while you're on birth control. So you can still incorporate that in. If you're not cycling, if you're finished cycling, you can still seed cycle. You do it with the moon cycle actually, which is pretty cool. But this is a really great way. And I've seen some pretty cool results. I've seen a lot of PMS symptoms normalize with seed cycling, and cycles be more regular with with seed cycling. And so there's something so incredible to be said about, using food and really supporting our bodies in the way that it's naturally been intended. So if you would like what I use in the Holistic Anxiety Fix, just a tiny piece of that program, if you would like that, just type seed cycling below and I will give you that resource. If you have any questions and you're watching the replay, let me know below.